In the first part of this series, I began to reflect theologically on trees, those beautiful creatures, icons of God's beauty and glory, often reminding us of our part, our creatureliness, resituating us within God's good world. And in the second part, we saw how trees also come to symbolize the human propensity to greed, to turn God's good creation into resources to be consumed. And how the prophets then envision another way, a way of justice and peace and living in right relationships with all God has made. We pick up there in this third and final part of this series as trees are given a place within the great story of God's healing of creation. And the more we learn about trees, the more we begin to get hints of this beauty and this mystery. And this strengthens us to play our uniquely human part in God's world. Now, as we saw with the cedars of Lebanon, trees have historically been cut to support the growth of the world's great empires. And we shouldn't be surprised to see this throughout the scripture. It's worth our reflecting on what it means to live in a world that bears the marks of this history. You see, you and I don't have the luxury of developing a theology of trees or of creation more broadly in the abstract. No, rather we must work out that theology within the specific context in which we live. And in this case, that means learning to see the pain, the violence of history as an essential background to the work we do as Jesus followers today. The danger, of course, is that we simply refuse to do so. But to develop a creation theology that overlooks the world's pain and trauma is to remain willfully blind to the call of God for the sake of our neighbors. We who have the privilege of walking through beautiful, intact forests such as this one here outside Victoria, we have the duty to draw strength from this, to be sure, but we mustn't forget that the world's hunger for resources continues vast and unbounded, and the pressures are great to continue to exploit these beautiful creatures for profit, often at the expense of the world's poor. At the same time, there are efforts underway to restore, to regenerate ecosystems that have been abused, that have been altered by human impact. And here we find hope for our struggle. One of my favorite stories of healing comes to us from the last book of the Bible as John, the Revelator, describes a vision of the tree of life planted on either side of the river as the waters of life flow, and the tree itself bears fruit in every season, and the leaves are given for the healing of the nations. Now, this tree has been planted to heal, to make right that which has been harmed and broken in God's good world. How might we see examples of this in our context? Well, friends, the Jesuit poet Gerard Manley Hopkins writes that nature is never spent. My friend who works in forestry tells me that on the BC coast, timber companies are forced to replant within a very short window of when the trees are cut. Why, I asked them. Because as soon as the trees are felled and the sunlight opens up to the soil below, other trees and species are moving in quick and will grow rapidly in the coastal climate. We might see images of this in a nursing log, trees or shrubs or vines that take root inside and alongside these mammoth stumps of old former trees. Now, don't get me wrong, the young, scrappy huckleberry isn't a straightforward replacement for the cedar that has been cut. And yet, my friends, we might see within that very huckleberry the kind of healing and life-giving leaves that Revelation speaks of. And how then might we envision our work, the work of followers of Christ, the work of the church? There was a time when Christendom was the tallest tree in all the land. And what it meant to be a Christian was to participate in the glory of that stately tree. But my friends, today in many places, certainly where I live, that tree, that cedar has fallen. And we can respond to this under the assumption that our job is to sort of fight our way back to being a tall tree in the forest again, regaining some kind of power or status. Or we can accept that this new reality might mean becoming nimbler, smaller, more contextual, situated within God's good creation still, to be sure, but taking a more careful approach to how we live that out? What if the work of Jesus is to take seriously his words that the meek shall inherit the earth? Meekness, my friends, is not weakness. Rather, it is a power rightly oriented toward the end that God has in mind. Meekness may be having the power to destroy or cut the last 8% of old-growth trees and choosing not to. Meekness might mean becoming part of a wounded, fragile ecosystem and seeking to offer what healing we can, rather than trying to grow our empires or flex our muscles in a new attempt at Christendom. As I behold this beautiful creek flowing with trees on both sides of it, as I behold the lilies of the field following Jesus' own instructions, I discover that nothing in creation lacks that divine gift of being a creature, and as such is a window pointing us back to our common Creator. As the contemporary poet Mary Oliver continues in the poem I began earlier, around me the trees stir in their leaves and call out, "Stay a while." The light flows from their branches. They call out, "It's simple," they say. And you too have come into the world to do this, to go easy, to be filled with light, and to shine. So my friends, I invite you, let us open our ears to the divine voice resounding through all creatures and all creation. Let us listen to the prophet's call to stand, yes, with the poor, to seek justice and right relationships. Let us do the hard work of sorting through the historical legacy of violence and destruction towards creation and towards its many first peoples. And friends, may the light break for us as the dawn. May the light and life of Christ be for us a vision of creation restored, of living in right relationships, of standing and working towards reconciliation and peace with all. For God is with us at work mysteriously everywhere, renewing the face of the earth. And for this, my friends, we say thanks be to God.